to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Basson and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author of a book, Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news or TV, social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today we have Emma James, and we are going to talk about change. Hi, Emma.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, my name's Emma James. I call myself a change consultant and coach. So I help people and organisations through the process of change. And whether that be from a coaching side of things or change management or a mixture of both. I've also got a psychology and naval background, so sometimes we might require boot camp type of issues. So whatever it takes to help people through. So
what is change anyway?
Well, some people will say that change is kind of the only constant in life. There is always constantly change. Nothing ever stays the same. You know, you think from moment to moment, something different can happen, and it's whether or not we have control of that. That can be an interesting one. And you know, some of that will be out of our control, but change is anything that is something that's different to what was happening a moment ago. So therefore there is only constant change.
And see, that's interesting because I can think of 1,000 million people who have met through the years or whatever, especially in the employed world, shall we call it, who actually feel that nothing ever changes.
And I guess that is actually how you perceive things. I mean, I guess for me, because I look and work with change all the time, that I look for the opportunities for change. And maybe that's the difference, is the mindset of whether you look for change and enjoy it and look for the benefits that change brings, or whether you just keep doing the same thing, looking for the same thing to come out of it. And then if you're happy with that, that is absolutely fine. I'm never going to judge anyone if they are happy where they are, because actually all we really want in life is to be happy. Mm-hmm. So they're achieving that from doing what they've always been doing, then fantastic. That's what we're all trying to achieve. However, if people are saying, oh, nothing ever changes, then I'd say, well, what's your role in that? What can you do?
And a lot of the time they feel that they can't. I mean, as you know, my background is in the security industry, and a number of the employees always used to moan that nothing ever changed. And actually they felt they had no power over that at all. Where you could argue that they did, but their perception was that, oh, I'm nothing, I'm just a number, I quote.
Do you know, and I can completely understand that, having been in the Navy with having a number and things, you
an actual real number.
An actual real number, you know, I think that's ingrained through my body. I'll always remember that number. I can reel it off at the top of my hat, and you felt sometimes like you were a number, and that you had limited choice over where you went. And, you know, because they would literally tell you where you were going to go, what you would wear when you were going there, and what you would eat when you got there. You know, so there's a lot of, in some ways, some people would find that quite reassuring because there's a lack of decision-making required. But at the same time, there may come a point where you just kind of had enough of doing that and think some things don't change, and you want to feel more than that. But there's always, I would say, there's always a choice where if it's not working for you, then you always have to look and say, okay, well, what are my options? You can do it a bit like a project and kind of think there's a do nothing option. So you would just keep doing the same thing and expect the same stuff to come out. But at the same time, you know, it's that whole thing of you can't expect something to change if you don't put an effort into making a change. So my thing would be, what can you do? And it could be, your change could be like leaving that, you know, if you're talking about in an employed role, you could look at leaving, or you could maybe look at a different job role or upskilling yourself. There's lots of different things. I mean, that might seem very drastic to people, particularly if there's a pension or if there's job security or they've got really good sick scheme or whatever it is that makes them feel like they're sort of caught in a rut. But at the same time, that rut's only there, we're self-imposing that, and it's just a case of having a look and thinking, right, what are my options within that, and what is it that it's not fulfilling? Can you fulfill that in a different way by doing voluntary work, by spending time with people you love that fill you up, you know, whatever it is that works for other people. It doesn't just necessarily have to be all about the work environment, although obviously we tend to spend a lot of time in that environment.
And funny enough, exactly the same thing in a relationship or a marriage. A lot of people feel that they're in a prison and that they can't leave.
Absolutely. And sometimes, and I appreciate it's not always easy because there may be additional issues.
Well, like you say, the pension, the this, the that.
Yeah, and wherever you take it in, I guess that's the kind of whatever box you find yourself in, you know, whether it's in a relationship box or a work box or a friendship box, or maybe it's a health and fitness box. There's always something you can do. It's not always easy to spot, and sometimes the options none of them might be particularly appealing, but there are always options. And I think it's really important for people to kind of, I always think, because I like to feel in control of my stuff. So if there's something that I can't control, you know, there will things that are happening in the world around us that we just can't control, but the thing we can always do is control our response to it. So it's looking at that and then thinking, okay, so what are the alternatives for me? What do I need to do in this environment to make a change, to be feeling back in control of it?
And I think one of the issues is that what you're talking about is taking responsibility. But a lot of people will not do that. They're waiting for someone to save them or bring them a new job or whatever on the plate, or they just don't do it.
Absolutely. And yeah, absolutely. And when I'm working with clients, I can tell whether they're ready to make a change and whether they're going to do it or not, because it's very obvious to me in how they're speaking and how they're behaving about whether or not they are at the point of being able to make that change, or whether they're still in a sort of maybe a blame culture of looking at other people and saying, oh, this always happens to me, or that happens, or or it's my friend is always, this happens, much luckier than me, or whatever, or just that negativity towards others. And think, actually, no, you kind of got to make your own not luck, but you've got to take ownership of your life. You get one life, you've got to take the ownership of it. It's up to you. You can't expect anyone else to be handing it to you on a plate, like you said. You know, we've all got different skills and resources, and how we choose to channel them and use them. But it's about taking responsibility for our own lives. And it may help that, you know, if you have, you know, for me, I had a brush with a serious illness, and it kind of made me realize that actually you really have one life. So actually that kind of cleared some of the filters of some of the rubbish, and just kind of made me think, well, okay, so what are my priorities for life? Recognizing that you have one go at it. And as you get through life, you realize that more of it might be behind you than ahead of you. And actually, what do you want to do with the time remaining? Not looking backwards, but using that, you know, that everything you've been through to that point has got you to that point. It's key stuff, and you take the learnings from that. But then when you're looking forward, there are so many paths that are open to you. But what feels comfortable, what manages to, what fits with where you want to be in life, what fits with your family situation, you know, and what fits with you. Because I think sometimes in relationships and families, we can kind of lose our own identities a little bit and become subsumed into the whatever role we're in. And actually, it's really important to be, you know, or if we've got dependent elderly parents or whatever it may be, it's just making sure we reconnect with our identity and our values, and making sure that we're doing stuff for us in all of that. And, you know, making sure that when changes are happening, that we are taking ownership of our bit and doing what works for us in conjunction. We don't work in an isolated world. We're all connected, but just looking at how that all fits together.
And I think, you know, one of the issues, because that's not difficult, what stops people from changing is fear.
Absolutely.
And one of the main fears is actually fear of being judged by others.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, being judged by others, and fear of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen. And, you know, fear of failure also comes in there. So
fear of success.
Absolutely. And that's often, I'm looking for the flip side of that, because very often people are worried about that side of it, and what would that be, and then how would people perceive them when they're, you know, if they were really successful, or when they're really successful, because perhaps they've always been lived with the belief that, you know, having money or whatever success looks like to them is showing off, and so that doesn't fit with the family values that they've been brought up with. And, you know, and it's just a really interesting concept about, but you're absolutely right, you know. There was an interesting psychologist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in the 60s, who identified what initially started off as the bereavement cycle and the 5 stages of grief, but actually they map really well onto the change. It's the change curve as well, and they map directly across. And sort of, you know, once the change happens, you know, you initially get the kind of denial, and then you go through into the fear and the questioning, and you might have some anger thrown in there, and you over this time you kind of see you know, your mood will be affected as well, and those kind of things. And then you tend to go down into a lower area where your mood is particularly low. But eventually you start to come out the other side, and you're starting to look for the opportunities within a change and think about how that might affect you and what benefits you can get before you come to the new norm. And it's just really interesting that that's, you know, that curve can be mapped so clearly. And even when it's a change that you might want. So for instance, I remember helping with one role where we were implementing a new payroll system. And so this has nothing to do with relations, but just to highlight the change. You know, we were implementing the system, and you know, the old one had worked. It was a little bit clunky, and you had to know specifically which screen, you know, to look at, the payslip screen and all this kind of thing. And the staff were saying to me, "Oh gosh, well, how are we going to find the payslip?" I'm like, "You'll just look on the payslip screen. It'll be that simple." But it was, even though it was going to be a great change and it was going to make life actually significantly easier, and it was going to be a much more streamlined system, just that whole kind of fear of going through that change, but giving them time to do. See, what you need to do is then look at what you need to do to help yourself through that curve. So for them, we were helping them with training and showing them how the system would work and the benefits, and how they would find the things that they would use every day, so that it allayed the fears and we could move through that curve. And it can be the same in relationships, you know, looking at what options you've got, what kind of feels like you can do, what can you manage in this chunk. And also sometimes just knowing that there is a curve and it does take time, and there is no specific time for people. Some people will move through curves pretty quickly, other people will bounce backwards and forwards. But actually, especially if you're going through a relationship breakdown and there's children involved or anything like that, actually something like the change curve can be really useful to kind of map out where you all are on that, and actually how do you help each other to move through it. And it's a perfectly normal experience to have, and actually just using it to see where everybody is and what needs to happen to help everybody move through to the new normal.
I think it really depends, really, like with change, whether you're the one instigating the change. So to a degree, whilst you may not know the outcome and what it's going to look like, you're still in charge of it, as opposed to it being forced upon you.
Absolutely. That makes a huge difference. You will still go through the curve, but those that have made the choice will probably go through it that bit quicker. But
or I've started the process before making the decision, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've been through all the initial stages. And you're absolutely right. And then for me, it's the person that's maybe not instigated. So if you're in the workplace and you're looking at redundancies or job changes or anything like that, excuse me, that's where, you know, it's then looking at the options, what your options are, and finding that little element of control that you can take back, and that ownership of, you know, which bits can you control. Is there an opportunity to become the spokesperson for the team? Is there the opportunity to volunteer for something else? Or is it an opportunity to look for another workplace? It's, you know, it's those kind of things. It's looking back, because there's nothing worse than change. Having been on the receiving end of change, there is nothing worse than change being done to you. It's very much about for me, it's always been do with. That's why I wanted to move into change, so I could make it more of a do with process for the teams that I worked with going forwards, because that for me is so important that, you know, you just, if you're just rolling it out over people, you're steamrolling over all their emotions and everything else, and just, you know, not respecting them as people and the choices that they are, you know, what's important to them.
And I think sometimes it's change for the sake of change. And I've got two examples of that, which, you know, I personally think that change is a good thing, but if it's not broken, don't fix it. We had one particular manager in one particular job who called us all up to go up north somewhere for a said meeting. And he started the meeting with a statement, which is, we're going to have to change, otherwise there's going to be redundancies. And we were like, why? Because to be fair, you know, it not explained that bit. There was another side of the business which had nothing to do with us, that we were going through redundancies, but what we were doing was completely different. The margins were different, everything was different. His second thing was, before we start the meeting, I just want to go through any other business, which you were like, well, we don't know what we're going to talk about, so I don't think I've got much to say at this point. And he then proceeded to go on about whatever change he decided to implement, which, to be honest with you, was not required at all, and was actually going to make it worse, because it was going to unstabilize everybody, basically, for the sake of it.
Yeah, interesting. Did he push that change through?
He got sacked, or he was moved on, or where there was circumstances where, you know, he wasn't, it didn't quite happen. What we also then found out, which he actually did not know at that point, was that we were in the process, or there were negotiations about our part being sold to a new company.
Right.
And the company who was buying us was really buying our processes more than anything else, because they were quite efficient. So for him to then want to change everything was just like, what? Obviously we didn't know this at this stage, and nor did he. But I think that just highlights the change for the sake of change, probably because he wanted to leave his own mark. I'm not sure. And the other example I've got, it was a friend of mine who works for a company, and they've created a system where basically anyone can sit anywhere in the office, in the open plan kind of office. So no one should have the desk, right? And then every 6 months or so, they completely change them. So let's say you're working on the first floor somewhere, you'd be even like change building. And I'm not convinced that was a positive change, because people were just settling into the new place where the coffee is and talking to new people and stuff, and then they were moved again. And I personally felt it was actually doing that business more harm than good.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think it's always interesting. You've got to look at what the purpose is for change. What is the purpose? What is the benefit of doing it? Because, you know, it's a standard project kind of thing when you're looking at it and kind of saying what's the cost benefit analysis, and what's the benefit to doing that change. It might not be in terms of cash benefit, but in terms of whatever value it brings to doing a change. And if it's not going to bring that value, I mean, in your first example with the boss that wanted to make the change, and my kind of thought would be, what was his initial brief from the hierarchy? You know, because actually, was he just ill-informed about the wider picture, or was he trying to make his mark? It's difficult to know, but you can see, I mean, in a way it's great that he was not able to push that through, because that would have been a waste of everyone's time and all the emotional stuff that comes with that. But I've also worked in a place where we did hot desking, and I mean, I don't mind that, because I quite like just having a laptop, and, you know, I've always been quite focused on keeping everything filed neatly on a computer system, so I don't need to have lots of stuff around. But some jobs do. Some people, they've been there, particularly where I worked, which was in a council, some people had been there 30 years, and they may have been in the same office for a large proportion of that. So, you know, in terms of, you know, everybody as individuals, we have different some of us prefer things to stay the same, and some prefer a bit more difference, and that, you know, and are up for a bit more change, and that's fine, because, you know, variety is the spice of life, and it makes us interesting, because we're all different. But I think if you read, you know, roughshod over everybody, and those people that have been there that long, that by the nature of they've been there, tells me that they like sameness. So to then rip them out of that, take them out of their comfort zone, you know, sometimes people will say stepping out of your comfort zone is where the magic happens, but I think also there can be such a dip in performance and mood, and it just can affect.
And it just depends on the person, because, you know, if we go back to that job and that manager or whatever, you know, not everybody wants to move up the food chain. Some people are quite happy doing the same job until they die, so to speak. And I had a chat when I took over the Maidstone office. He'd been working for the company for 20 years, and he was doing Saturday and Sunday days, and he was doing Monday and Tuesday nights every week, right? His life was around that. It was about his family. It was about all of that. And he'd been doing that for 20 years. When we got bought, they obviously decided to change that. Obviously, there was an HR element to that, but they managed to do it eventually. And he left. And I thought, for him to leave, you know, he must have been so deeply unhappy, because otherwise he would have stayed until the day he retired.
Absolutely. And you can, you know, if someone's done that, it's obviously that routine worked really well for him around his other life priorities, and maybe that was what, you know, was the thing for him, that he could fit in whatever else it was that was important to him, and it worked really well, and it got that lovely balance, you know. And if that had tipped, then maybe that's where he thought, right, that's it, that's no longer for me. And also the loyalty, I guess, the element of that you feel they're not respecting that, potentially. And it's difficult to know what someone's feeling, but something had tipped, something had changed for him that meant that he could no longer stay in that environment. But it is, and everybody's different. We've all got different kind of tipping points, if you like. And some people, much more kind of ready for change and able to embrace it, whereas other people prefer not to, and that's absolutely fine. But it's just when change is happening around us, it can be really, really overwhelming, and you know, you can feel really out of kilter, out of sorts with yourself, not really sure where to start with stuff. And it's then finding little ways to kind of get back into a new system, a new routine, whatever it may be that works for you.
But I think on the other side of this, you know, there are times where, I mean, I can certainly relate to that, but I know other people too, where I have wanted change and I've tried to get the change and I've done everything I could. Nothing happened. Then I tried doing nothing to see what happened. Nothing happened. And there was that sense of actual limbo where I was like, well, I'm doomed if I do, I'm doomed if I don't. Nothing is happening.
And what did you do in the end? What was the outcome?
Nothing happened for 4 years. Just literally, my life was just, it really genuinely did not matter what I did. There was no change to the outcome.
Yeah.
And that made me at the time question a lot of things around free will and, you know, do we really have the power to change our environment or what's around us and all the rest of it? And I guess now, with hindsight, I've come to the conclusion that, yeah, we probably have more free will that I felt at the time. I guess sometimes it's also an element of timing. We're not always ready for certain changes, for certain things to happen. And that was possibly what it was. But Jesus, at the time, it was painful.
Absolutely, absolutely. But at the end of the 4 years, something's changed because you're not still in that situation now.
Completely. I'm not sure how, if I'm completely honest, but yeah, things all of a sudden started falling into place where they didn't before. And that's happened, funny enough, that's in my particular life, it's happened twice.
Interesting. I wonder what has been the trigger point. What's changed to make the change?
To be honest, I'm not really sure. I mean, as I said, the first time, nothing was, it just kind of happened. I suppose it was pretty much where you wake up one day and you're like, oh, it's a bit different. What is that? And I couldn't pinpoint anything that made it that way. The second time, I suppose, is all of the things I had done eventually came together, as opposed to, you know, I've been in vain, shall we say. But the first time, I can't pinpoint it really top of my head, if that makes sense.
And it maybe it's just a culmination of things, and maybe if there are other people involved or other circumstances involved, that actually just something realigned, whether it was even an astral realignment or something in the universe shifted and just enabled things to be able to move around. And there is an element sometimes, I think, of, like you mentioned about timing, that sometimes, you know, you are where you need to be for right now, and just go with that, because sometimes if you're fighting stuff and pushing stuff and nothing is happening, sometimes there's a reason it's just not the right time, something's not, and then all of a sudden one day it'll just click. And you go, okay, now is the right time to do whatever it is, whether it's a job change, a relationship change, having kids, not having kids, whatever it might be. You know, it can be just an element.
And funny enough, you say about having kids, how many people say how much they're trying, nothing happens, they give up and it happens?
You hear that such a lot of times, you know, and it's very often, isn't it, when you kind of just stop caring quite so much about something, or just say, right, that's it, that's the final attempt at whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, just because you've relaxed and you've changed your mindset about it, and you know, and it can be the same with jobs as well, you know, all of a sudden, then you suddenly, the energy shifts around it, and then things start happening.
Or with relationships, because I do see it quite regularly where people are trying, and then one day, exactly that, they wake up and it's like, no, I'm not doing that anymore.
And you know, and it is that, so it is, you know, it's almost, it's not like a big change in like, it's not kind of like a tangible change, but it's just a mindset change, and just thinking, right, actually I'm having that shift, and it's allowing, you know, sometimes if I find that I've got negative thoughts going on, you know, in my head, and it's on a repeat pattern, I have to physically distract myself to kind of think about something else and think, right, if I keep thinking this, then the outcome is a negative one. So actually what I need to do is be thinking about something. What do I want to happen? How can I be instead to shift that? Because I can sometimes be aware that I'm creating my own blocker for stuff, and I have to kind of divert myself to come back, to kind of dodge that blocker, because I know that that's going to take me down a bit like a black hole that's waiting to suck you in, and it's not a good one. So, it's kind of finding a way to dodge past that by doing something else, distract yourself, starting to think about different things, literally training your brain to look for those problem areas.
Yeah, and it's self-awareness in that way, but also I think, we are all creatures of habits, whether we like it or not. Routine is important to anyone just because of how our brain works, full stop. But I think sometimes breaking habits has to be done on a more aware level, shall we say.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that as you were saying that, because for me, the first point of it is awareness. So very often we do things so subconsciously because we always have, because we learnt it when we were very young, or something has triggered, and this is just our kind of inbuilt rules of how things happen and what we do. And sometimes, it's, you can't do anything about them when they're running on that kind of automatic programming level. But once you become aware of them and go, oh, now that's interesting, why do I do that, and question it, then you've got a choice about, is that still the right way? Does that still serve me at this point in my life? Or do I want to be a different way? Would something else be more useful? What can I change? And then once you've got that awareness, you've got the choice point, and then you make a decision about how you want things to be.
No, completely. So the last thing I really want to talk about is expectations, I suppose, because with change comes a certain sense of expectation that change should happen, for instance, or that an outcome should happen as a result. Yeah. And very often the results are very different from the expectation.
I think probably I have no idea what the science would be, but probably 90% is different from what you expect. And so there's a thing there for me about staying in the moment, because actually if we look too far ahead, sometimes that can bring anxiety for people. So it's actually kind of looking at where we are right now and being happy with where we are, and setting the intention of where we want to go, maybe not having completely defined expectations or outcomes, because actually it very often is not how we expect it to be. We can think through different scenarios, but actually we can waste a lot of brain power, I think, thinking through all these different scenarios when actually that's not necessarily what's going to happen. But we can kind of put it out there what we would like to happen and be working.
It's to reassure ourselves, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
And also, I mean, the other thing as well is half the time we look at the worst case scenario. So
absolutely, and I think that's the human nature. We do tend to look at the worst time, but it's also then thinking, understanding and having the confidence, I guess, in ourselves to know that no matter what the outcome, if we've got the positive intent and we're working in the direction that we want, that actually we've got the resources, the internal skills, capabilities, resources to be able to deal with whatever outcome comes our way, so that then we are able to, whether it's more positive than we were expecting or not as positive as we were hoping for, that we will be able to kind of go from that, learn whatever we need to learn from that, and then take that forward to our next steps.
It's just made me think of something, and I'd like to have your take on it before we kind of wrap up. Yeah. I was thinking, as you were saying this, about the element of risk, because sometimes for a change to work, you have to take certain risks. And some people are, very calculated with the risk that they're willing to take. Other people are completely risk adverse. Yeah. And other people are just a bit mad and just do anything.
Absolutely. And I suppose at the end of the day, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think about this as well, working for myself and sort of, being an entrepreneur, and actually how do you balance that with being quite, not risk averse, but risk conscious. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting. You have to do with what you're comfortable with, but at the same time, you have to be willing to take a leap and to have the faith in your abilities, that you've got a cushion. But sometimes people will think if it's maybe it's a financial cushion that they need, maybe it's something else that they need, or maybe it's a backup plan of a part-time job or something else, or you said a part-time relationship, but whatever it is that helps
you, that is.
But whatever it is that helps you to transition, sometimes people need that transition point. Other people are going, nearly said a rude word, but it's time to jump off the cliff. It's just the right time, and you kind of have to listen to what you're comfortable with, because we're all different, we're all individuals, and sometimes it will be when the balance.
It's different times of life. It's different aspects of life. You might be more willing to take a risk than in others as well. I mean, I found for me that actually I've realised I take far more risks than I thought I would.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, and you're absolutely right, because as you go through life, I think that different life experiences have an impact, and just you start thinking about things in a different way, and you don't know that when you're 19, 20. And I sometimes work with teenagers, and it's like, gosh, if I knew then what I knew now, but then would I have listened? Probably not.
And this is it, but it's being willing to learn the lesson, because people don't always, they get stuck in their own, no, this is what I believe and I'm sticking to it, even though it's not working.
Absolutely. But that's that whole cycle, isn't it, of going around the same thing and getting the same thing out. And that's actually where, you kind of think, that's fine if you're happy with that, but actually if you want something different, you've got to do something different to get out of that cycle. And only you can really do that. Or if someone forces you out of it, you're going to complain about it.
Well, Emma, thank you so much for your time today. It's been, I could talk to you about this like all day. It's been lovely talking to you, so thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for talking, and thank you for asking me. It's been lovely.
Thank you. And for everybody else, if you've enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, but more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.